The feudal legacy, a world divided into layers. Feudalism was the dominant system in Europe between the 9th and 15th centuries. Based on land ownership and the relations of dependence between lords and vassals, it created a hierarchical, decentralized, and profoundly unequal society. The fundamental principles of feudalism can be summarized in three axes. 1. The concentration of power and resources in the hands of a few. 2. Personal loyalty over institutions. 3. The association between property and authority. These concepts, although born in the Middle Ages, shaped Western political culture and later the British colonies that would give rise to the United States. From Europe to America, feudalism crossing the Atlantic. When English settlers arrived in North America, they didn't just bring guns and Bibles, they brought with them the European feudal mentality. In 17th century England, there was still a landed aristocracy. The nobles controlled vast rural estates, and Parliament was dominated by traditional families. Even the British constitutional monarchy was a direct remnant of the feudal pyramid. The first American colonies, especially in Virginia, Maryland, and South Carolina, were founded under land grant systems that mimicked the feudal structure. Large planters received land titles from the king and exercised almost absolute authority over their domains with subordinate laborers, indentured servants, and later enslaved people. These colonial lords became the de facto nobility of the New World, creating a model of concentrated power that would persist for centuries. The colonial aristocracy, the lords of the New Earth. During the 17th and 18th centuries, the economic and social system of the English colonies strongly resembled European feudalism. Land was the main symbol of status and political power. Colonial elites, families like the Washingtons, Jeffersons, and Lees, formed an agrarian aristocracy based on plantations, slaves, and local loyalty. They controlled agricultural production, the regional economy, and, in many cases, public offices. Like the feudal lords of the Middle Ages, these men saw themselves as patriarchs and protectors of their dependents, justifying social inequality as something natural. Paternalism and political clientelism, typical of the feudal world, were rooted in the culture of the colonies. This landed aristocracy not only sustained the colonial economy, but also profoundly influenced the political thinking of the nation's founders. The founding of the United States. Freedom or new fiefdom. The American Revolution, 1775-1783, was proclaimed as a break with tyranny, a rebellion against hereditary power and imperial rule. However, when we analyze their social bases, we realize that the leaders of independence were, in large part, heirs of the colonial aristocracy, owners of large properties, and enslaved. The new republic abolished titles of nobility, but retained the economic and symbolic structure of a hierarchical system. Suffrage was restricted to white men and landowners, reproducing the feudal ideal that power belongs to those who own land. Thomas Jefferson, author of the Declaration of Independence, advocated liberty and equality, but he also believed that the ideal society would be composed of landowner citizens, a direct echo of the European agrarian nobility. Thus, the young American Republic was born without kings or titles, but with lords and vassals of a new type. The fiefdom of capital, the transformation of power. With the advance of industrial capitalism, domination over land gave way to domination over capital. But the feudal logics of hierarchy and dependence persisted. They just exchanged the castle for the corporation. The big companies and industrial families of the 19th century, the Vanderbilts, Rockefellers, Carnegies, became the new feudal lords of the American economy. They controlled entire economic territories, imposed their own rules, and cultivated a culture of paternalistic philanthropy similar to the charity of medieval nobles. The worker, like the serf, depended on the master to survive. The relationships of personal loyalty, favoritism, and submission were replaced by contracts and corporate hierarchies, but the logic of vertical power remained. American federalism and the feudal roots of decentralization. The political system of the United States is a federation. Power is divided between the central government and the states. This structure, often celebrated as a democratic innovation, has clear roots in feudal decentralization. In feudalism, power was fragmented among several autonomous lords who owed nominal allegiance to the king but ruled their own domains. Similarly, in the USA, each state has its own laws, courts, and governments, enjoying great autonomy in relation to federal authority. This decentralization guarantees diversity and local freedom, but it also reproduces tensions and inequalities inherited from feudal logic. The richest states concentrate power and influence, while the poorest remain dependent. In addition, topics such as civil rights, abortion, guns, and taxes are regulated differently, creating ideological fiefdoms within the federation. Political clientelism, modern vassals. Another feudal legacy in American politics is patronage, the exchange of favors, offices, and resources for political loyalty. During the Middle Ages, the relationship between suzerain and vassal was based on reciprocal benefits. The lord granted land and protection. The vassal reciprocated with military services and support. In contemporary America, this logic translates into political sponsorship and campaign financing. Businessmen, interest groups, and lobbyists invest in candidates, expecting legislative retribution and tax benefits. In the same way, politicians distribute funds and positions to local allies, maintaining networks of dependency. In essence, the vow has replaced the oath of allegiance, but the personal power structure, based on alliances and obligations, remains alive. The political elite, as a new nobility. Although the U.S. presents itself as a meritocratic democracy, political dynasties reveal another story. Families like the Kennedys, the Bushes, the Clintons, and the Roosevelts form a true Republican nobility. As in feudal Europe, power is transmitted through symbolic inheritance, family prestige, and networks of influence. Access to elite universities, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, functions as a new title of nobility, reserving the highest positions in government, justice, and corporations for a privileged minority. The concentration of political and economic power in a few families echoes the old feudal pyramid, where blood, name, and fortune determined fate. The class structure, modern lords, vassals, and servants. Although the American system formally rejects the idea of fixed classes, social inequality reflects medieval patterns. The richest 10% control more than 70% of the national wealth, while millions depend on precarious jobs, abusive credits, and assistance policies. Access to education, health, and opportunity is concentrated in the upper castes of the economy. Billionaires and CEOs take the place of feudal lords, workers and immigrants fulfill the role of serfs, and the state, weakened by lobbies and regional divisions, functions as a king who reigns but does not rule. This structure reveals a symbolic continuity between the medieval fiefdom and contemporary capitalism. Both are based on vertical dependence and the naturalization of inequality. The feudal mentality in American political culture. U.S. politics is strongly marked by feudal values disguised as individualism. The cult of personal loyalty, the figure of the boss, the strong leader, reflects the ancient submission to the master. The rhetoric of the self-made man is, paradoxically, an echo of the ideal of the self-made knight, faithful only to his oath and his honor. Partisan polarization and political tribalism, Republicans versus Democrats, red states versus blue, reproduce feudal fragmentation. Each group defends its ideological territory as if it were a moral fiefdom. Even the notion of the armed homeland, expressed in the Second Amendment, derives from the feudal logic of communal self-defense, in which each free man was expected to bear arms to protect his landlord. The electoral system, a remnant of feudal loyalties. The Electoral College, the central institution of American presidential elections, also has origins in feudal distrust. The Republic's founders feared the multitude the common people, and created a system in which elected intermediaries choose the president on behalf of the states. This mediation reflects the old feudal hierarchy. The people, serfs, elect local representatives, vassals, who then swear allegiance to a leader, suzerain. Direct democracy, therefore, is filtered through layers of authority, a medieval echo in the midst of the modern era. The Cold War and the seigneurial logic of global power. During the 20th century, American foreign policy also expressed feudal dynamics of vassalage and domination. The U.S. has assumed the role of global overlord, protecting allied countries in exchange for political and military allegiance. NATO's alliance system, for example, functions as a network of modern vassals, sustained by tribute, military spending, and oaths, treaties. Countries that defied the suzerain, such as Cuba, Iran, or North Korea, were punished with sanctions, isolation, or war, similar to the repression of feudal rebels. Thus, the logic of personal power and protection in exchange for submission continues to shape American international policy. The invisible heritage. Feudalism in democracy. The U.S. political system is often described as the oldest modern democracy, but beneath its surface, the structures and mindsets inherited from feudalism persist. Loyalty replaces ideology, wealth defines influence, decentralization favors the local powerful, and inequality is justified as a natural consequence of freedom. The feudal heritage lies not only in the institutions, but in the fundamental ideas of power, merit, and hierarchy that still govern the American collective mind. Attempts at rupture. Equality, rights, and contradictions. Throughout history, social and political movements have tried to break with these inherited structures. The abolition of slavery, universal suffrage, civil rights, feminism, trade unionism, and, more recently, digital progressivism. Each of these movements represents an attempt to overthrow the symbolic castle of the elite and to build a truly horizontal society. But, as in medieval peasant revolts, the reaction of the lords is swift, and power recomposes itself in new forms. The challenge of the 21st century is to recognize that the struggle for equality is also a struggle against the ghosts of feudalism. From fiefdom to Congress. The story that never ends. The policy of the United States was born out of the promise of breaking with the old world. But in trying to escape European feudalism, he ended up inheriting its fundamentals: hierarchy, clientelism, concentration of power, and structural inequality. Feudalism does not survive in laws but in ways of thinking about power: who deserves to rule, who should obey, who controls resources, and who pays the price. Understanding these roots is essential to understanding why, even after centuries of progress, American politics still looks like a field of masters, vassals, and serfs, only with new names. The Middle Ages never ended. She just exchanged the castle for a skyscraper, the lord for a CEO, and the oath of vassalage for a vote. If this historical analysis surprised you, subscribe, activate the bell, and share. In the next episode, we will explore how global capitalism has transformed feudalism into a new form of worldwide dependence.